Well, I have to follow those two, so that's great for me. Based on the reflections, I actually think it's good for me to respond. I was going to open with one story, but I think I'll open with two and cut some of my other remarks. But to follow Dr. Chris, right, I will also share a small chant that I grew up with. Asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritam gamaya Om Shanti 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 Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Those were the last words my grandfather spoke before he passed. And what it means is lead me from darkness to light, from untruth to truth, darkness to light, and then finally from death to immortality. And maybe some of you have heard the word Shanti before as peace. But the last phrase, Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu, means let everyone in the world experience the same joy that I do. It seems like a beautiful sentiment, and it's one that I was raised with, chanted very regularly. But what I want to talk about today is the question that Dr. McCormick started us with, which is whose imagination? I write about Hindu publics, and I write about them in digital spaces, but I also write about hate politics. And one of the things that I think animates me is precisely that question. When we imagine a public, are we imagining the contradictions in that public? The beauty of imagining other people's happiness is often undermined when we think about how it undercuts our own. And this is what I'm going to talk about today. So I am now going to give a small trigger warning because I'm going to discuss a bomb threat. So going from what I just said to a bomb threat with my second story. If this conference goes forward, I will become Osama bin Laden and bomb everyone. I hope you will not mistake me. This threat was received at an academic conference that I was a part of, that I was organizing. In 2021, I joined as an organizer for a conference on dismantling global Hindutva. Hindutva is the Indian neologism for Hindu nationalism. Hindu nationalism is a nativist far-right ideology akin to white supremacy or white Christian nationalism, which believes that India was a homeland only for Hindus and all others are invaders. This particular conference was academic inquiry. It was held online. Most academic conferences don't have a lot of people who attend. I will say, as I speak for my fellow academics, we are pretty excited when 30 people show up. This particular conference, because of the topic, ended up eliciting 30,000 impressions on YouTube. It was live streamed by 2 different TV stations, but you might wonder why. It shouldn't have been. It was because of these kinds of threats. And the ways in which this animated a particular group of folks. We have these organizations that purport to be Hindu advocates that are on US soil, but instead they are apologists for this particular supremacist ideology. They find common cause with white supremacists and white Christian nationalists, and it looks like we may have a few of those in our current government coming to be. But it's not surprising to me to see that kind of supremacist ideology making friends and solidarities with other supremacist ideologies. This particular conference was a group of scholars and journalists and activists from all over the world. Dozens of prominent institutions from Harvard to Yale to Stanford to University of Toronto, University of Virginia, University of Pennsylvania sponsored the conference. But it also gathered widespread condemnation from Hindu nationalist organizations like the Hindu American Foundation, or the Coalition of North American Hindus, or the Vishwa Hindu Parishad America. All of these organizations instituted a massive letter writing campaign, which actually crashed the servers at Drew University, which was a sort of weirdly hilarious thing that happened. What do you want? What were they asking, right? What were they concerned about? They said, some suggested, I should say, that critiquing any aspect of India or Hindu cultural ideas would result in the harm to Hindus, right? Particularly Hindu students, they believed. Others said that the conference was inherently Hindu-phobic because Hindu nationalism and Hinduism are inseparable. Still others suggested that this was an example of the West exporting their quote-unquote woke ideas of social justice and imposing them on Indian and Hindu culture in a modern act of cultural colonization, right? Despite the threats, despite all of the trauma, I will tell you, I spent a week on my own couch, huddled in my pajamas, afraid to leave the house because of the death threats and rape threats that I was getting to my personal email. I thought about my grandfather's chant. I thought about how I was raised with this idea of Vasudeva Kutumbakam, the whole world is my family. The idea that we should always be living in equanimity with others, that everyone is part of the same world. And then watching people purporting to be a part of the religion in which I was raised in, literally sending me death threats and rape threats. And how can I hold those two together? But the threat here was not to Hindus. The threat was not to Hinduism. The threat was to very specifically Hindu exceptionalism. They alone are discriminated or victimized. Hinduism cannot afford critique, right? Certainly not to the facets of the tradition, but it was more than that. This was an abdication of responsibility to look inward at our own biases, our own prejudices, our own types of supremacies that are internal. I submit that without examining such baked-in supremacies of our spiritual and religious traditions, any imagined unity will always be exclusionary. The pluralism and contradictions inherent within Hindu traditions are lost when groups suggest that we cannot look at our own supremacies. Things like, for example, caste discrimination. These same groups have opposed legislation preventing caste discrimination. For those of you that don't know what that is, that's a social hierarchy that tells people that you get to be in a particular job or a particular rung of society because of which family you were born into, right? Critiques of Hindu nativism, right? That India can only ever be a homeland for Hindus. What happens to the 200+ million Muslims who have lived there for generations, or Christians, or the indigenous Jewish population, or more importantly, the group that always gets lost, what we call the Adivasis, or the first dwellers, the indigenous people of India, right? In a Hindu world, what happens to those people? What otherwise world do they have? I would suggest that should be the opposite, that only through deep introspection and sitting with discomfort, as feminist scholar Sarah Ahmed teaches us, can we truly move forward towards inclusive and multiple-oriented imaginaries that can advance a shared inclusive future for all. In the Hindu context, this means grappling honestly with our community's anti-Blackness, our community's ingrained Islamophobia, our community's traditionalist casteism, which have become a part of the fabric of the Hindu nationalist vision, but have always undergirded, grounded Hinduism. They are also Hindus. Hindu nationalists are Hindus. Those that oppose it are Hindus. How do we sit with those kinds of dissonances? To be clear, these concerns, right, are not something outside. They are concerns that we all hold and have to grapple with, right? We must sit with that kind of dissonance and fracture in honest ways. We must confront them in order to move forward into an imagined community that can be plural and dissonant while still holding together. I want to not take up too much of our time so that we have more time for discussion. So let me end with one final reflection on the phrase that I gave you earlier, Vasudeva Kutumbakam. Vasudeva Kutumbakam has been taken by Hindu nationalists to be deployed as a certain kind of family, an exclusionary belonging that only those that fit the metric of this majoritarian Hindu vision can truly belong. They have, what I would say is cannibalized the languages of indigeneity and indigenous belonging. But we can take it back. And it starts with this phrase. This notion of Vasudeva Kutumbakam can be a place that we can begin with a radical belonging. What if Vasudeva Kutumbakam, the whole world is my family, means we can sit in dissonance, we can sit in disagreement, we can sit with cultural difference and actually hold all of those with equity? What if radical belonging meant I don't have to be in the same spiritual place as you? What if radical belonging meant I can treat all with humanity, right? By reclaiming Vasudeva Kutumbakam, we can advance a different vision of belonging and inclusivity in which justice and equity shape the notion of family, where we don't shy away from our shortcomings. We confront them. We sit with the discomfort of knowing that, for example, my own position here was wrought in part, yes, by immigrants, but also with caste privilege that I hold. That I can sit with the fact that many family members that I have engaged in unbelievable anti-Black practices, that many of my own family in India today continue to advance very disturbing and violent Islamophobic ideas. I can critique those without feeling like my own tradition has been somehow undermined. Where discomfort is the key of interrogation of our own positions of vulnerability as well as privilege. Where othering of traditions that feel foreign is rejected in favor of a politics of holding difference as love. And I'm going to stop there. You made me throw out my whole talk. That was so good. I just made that up.